This is take three. Lord have mercy. If I only had a brain. Um, let's see. I'm 99. I just checked to make sure we had sound. I'm gonna go up here. All right. Both of the failed attempts lasted exactly 54 minutes. Isn't that interesting? So this is take three. I don't know. The only silver lining on this thing is that both times I felt like in making some comments on the stuff you sent to me, maybe I said a little too much. Maybe revealed maybe a little bit of a lean. So I'm going to try to do it slightly different from the first two times. But before my attack of technological incompetence, 108 minutes of recording ago, I had read, your responses to the violinist and the elephant picture. Okay. And the responses were interesting. Now, I have now sent you like 8 million like little things while I was like especially a lot of stuff on forgiveness. So I like the Amish story on forgiveness. This fall there was a Dallas police officer that killed an African American unarmed man in his apartment. He was an accountant. He wasn't doing anything wrong. And then his brother forgave her. The Mother Emanuel Church, the Charleston shooting. We kind of forget that they forgave the assailant because Confederate flag stuff came out of that. And then I sent you this oh my gosh, the greatest ever section of Gandhi, the movie Gandhi, and I'm reading a book about Gandhi right now, on how forgiveness forgiveness and like the civil war between the Hindus and the Muslims. All right, so all kinds of, nothing to, I don't know, there's nothing for you to send me about that, but it's just, I don't know, coronavirus is a good time for reflection. Got a little time in the house, a lot of time in the house with ourselves. One of the things I've been reading, make sure you're kind of right with everybody. If there's somebody your relationship ain't right with them, take some time, tell yourself to shut up about your anger towards them and forgive them. All right. And so lots of stories of forgiveness starting with the Amish. Okay. If I say something that doesn't sit well with you here, forgive me. All right. Okay. So here's what folks said about the violinist article. The violinist article, all you got was like a paragraph out of it that I forgot to change to say you agree to be hooked up to an unconscious violinist. The article itself says you wake up to find yourself. All right, and so like almost every pro-life student said, well, this is about abortion, but it's a problem because the analogy is really about rape and abortion. It's not about consent and abortion. And so 99.9% of the cases, the violinist analogy is irrelevant to. And that's a point well taken. Probably the better thing to do is imagine a scenario where you initially consented to this thing, and then now maybe you're having second thoughts, and does the government have the right to tell you, well, you agreed? Can the government make you? And it doesn't make somebody, and we don't want to really dodge the question and say, well, it doesn't matter if it's national. The government, national government, state government, the authorities, can they make you stay hooked up? And I noticed that of all the pro-life answers, only one person said, yes, the government has the right to make me stay hooked up. But the pro-life answers were insightful in pointing out the problem with the analogy, the initial problem with the analogy. One person also pointed out, and I think this is important, the violinist analogy. Well, here, let me talk about what's good about the violinist analogy. A violinist isn't cute like a baby. So we don't have this emotional attachment to the violinist like we do to a baby. Also, the violinist is clearly a person. It's not some potential person. He's clearly a person, and people have rights. The most essential right is the right to life. The violinist has a right to life. The right to life outweighs our rights to, not being inconvenienced, in a certain sense, as the most fundamental of all rights. And so And he's a good person. He's not saving the world, but he's not Hitler. He has grown up to do a good thing, to become an accomplished violinist, and his violin playing soothes the soul. Okay. So it takes care of, it gets out of the way a lot of the arguments we get stuck with when we're arguing about abortion. All right. Now, one person, another pro-life student, also insightfully said, yeah, but the story is really it's more of an analogy to taking a relative off of life support because they've got a do not resuscitate order, because an abortion is the killing of this fetus. It's a rather violent action. It's not just I won't go into details of it, but if you look up the details of it, it's a much more active action than just unhooking somebody from a ventilator. It's not letting someone die, it's taking a life. And then the question, then you run into the question of personhood here. All right. So then you have the elephant story picture. The elephant picture. All right. I just see this as a pro-life argument. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and we're going to take note of that about halfway through this video. Because the picture looks like an elephant. It doesn't look like a potential elephant like in my dad's philosophy class, 1988, 1889, somewhere in there. He got us to read this violinist article. It's a long article written in 1971 as the nation was really kind of considering legalizing abortion. I'll send you the article. But, the elephant picture to me is the counter argument. So the violinist is the most famous pro-choice argument ever made. The elephant picture is not famous. I stumbled across it. I felt like putting a picture of a human fetus is a little much. It gets a little emotional. But elephant fetus is a little less. But it looks like an elephant. Doesn't look like a potential elephant. And like Daddy, who's pro-choice, my dad's pro-choice on abortion, in his class, made the case that a fetus wasn't, while a human being, a fetus is alive, it has a heartbeat, but it's not a person with rights yet, it's a potential person. It's not a person yet until it's born. But, the elephant picture is kind of a counter argument because it looks so much like a dang elephant. It's the eyeball test. And so my pro-choice students went to work on that analogy and said, yeah, but Mackenzie, that's an awful late stage elephant fetus. Most abortions are early stage abortions. And so again, kind of like the case with the pro-life student, the argument is your analogy is not getting to the heart of the matter. Your analogy is getting to a vast minority of the cases. And so both cases, in both instances, good work. There's good work there. Good work being done by both sides. It was decidedly not a reference to the Republican Party. Maybe next year I'm going to put a picture of a donkey fetus. I don't know. Somebody might say it's like a Freudian thing. You've really got Republicans on your mind, Mackenzie, when you're talking about this. Why would you pick an elephant feet? I don't know about that, but that was absolutely not the intent. All right. And then we've got the immigration comparison that I think is an interesting one. So here's how I'm going to put this. Most of the time, the folks who are liberal on immigration are conservative on if you're that's not right. All right, let's put it this way. Imagine we've got a hypothetical scenario, right? Someone is liberal on immigration but conservative on abortion, and that person makes the case that our job as decent people, as a society, if we're religious, whatever that religious tradition is going to have verses in the text, that religious text, about the treatment of what the Bible calls the least of these. All right. And folks that are not sympathetic to the vulnerable might call an undocumented immigrant an illegal and would say, hey, this fetus is a fetus, it's not a person. All right? One might make that case, in which case somebody might say, no, we're using this term because it's just true. And then the person might, the initial person might say, well, yeah, the word illegal is kind of a euphemism. The word fetus is kind of a euphemism to deny one's humanity. And might go on to say, maybe we shouldn't abort or deport. All right. Although, people tend to not look at it that way. One might make that case. And then, hey, if that person was a teacher, maybe the students say, I think you're going too far, and I also think you're basing your convictions not on a secular argument, but on verses in the Bible. And there's plenty of verses in the Bible about immigrants, way more than there are about abortion. But there's verses in the Bible about with implications for abortion, and then the student might say, hey, I think you're violating the Establishment Clause. You're breaking the law. All right, because you're paid by the taxes, by the taxpayer, in which case the teacher might say, well, maybe I'm just an illegal Christian, or for short, because illegal Christian is a little of a mouthful, you can just call me an illegal for short. All right, that's a conversation that might happen in a hypothetical scenario. I'm not saying it happened, or is that it has ever exactly happened, but it's a hypothetical that sheds the debate and still a new light. And I guess the moral of the story, the thing I would say about this, as with everything else, we want to be humble about our convictions. I want to be humble about my convictions. If anybody ever hurts my feelings, I need to forgive them. All right, the Amish, the Gandhi, the Charleston Church. The brother there in Dallas tells me anytime somebody says something that I think is a little judgmental or judgy or ugly or hypocritical or whatever, I don't have to tolerate and say, well, hey, that's you. Who knows what the truth is? We're trying to get at the truth. And that argument says we need that. One of the articles I sent to you says we need friends who are smart and love us and fiercely disagree with us to attack our opinions, our convictions, so that we'll refine these convictions. And that's a scary process, and the article says that so much great political thought came out of the friendship between Plato and Aristotle. And in my own life, my dad's kind of Plato and I'm Aristotle. And so, and we've never really felt any tension with each other over the places that, we kind of disagree. We're on the same side, same party, but we kind of disagree, and we disagree on some kind of hot button cultural issues, but it hadn't caused tension. So, same old story. Next verse, same as the first. Stand up for what you believe in. Make a tough argument. Challenge others to make tough arguments that disagree with you. If they hurt your feelings, forgive them. But also listen to them so that you come up with a more mature argument. All right? It makes us better to listen to smart people who attack our positions. Don't attack us, we don't attack them, but they attack our positions. All right. Hey, let's go with the Supreme Court, shall we? Hopefully, this stuff's working. All right, so write it down. All right, right to privacy. All right, so now we're translating the political debate from religious terms, from political terms, into judicial terms, as we've done when we go, hey, it's not liberal or conservative, it's activist and originalist, right? Okay, so birth control. So we're going to the state of Connecticut. The case is Griswold versus Connecticut, and birth control had been illegal in Connecticut since 1849. Sometimes states don't quite bother. Things change, and the states never to bother to take a law off the books. It wasn't that most people in Connecticut thought birth control should be illegal. It's just that they didn't realize there was still a law against it. All right? We're going to find that in a Texas case as well here today. All right, so the Griswolds were the founders of an interest group that's still around, very liberal, pro-choice interest group called Planned Parenthood. So they opened up a birth control clinic called Planned Parenthood, and they're breaking the law, civil disobedience, Martin Luther King style, and they're giving people advice about birth control. Incidentally, let's go to the unusual things about abortion and like history well one more time. Like one of the first ever pro-life conventions, 1970, 1971. Keynote speaker, an extremely liberal Vietnam War protester. After all, what was one of the most harmful things that war protesters said about soldiers when they came home? What they call them? Baby killers. All right. On the other hand, the Baptist Church, according to a book I read, the first couple of years after Roe v. Wade, pro-choice. And then people kind of started shifting around. So there were originally plenty of pro-life Democrats, pro-choice Republicans, but then people gradually started moving to their respective corners. All right, so hey, back to our story here. All right, they got arrested. All right, and so in the court case, Griswold versus Connecticut, the court ruled that people have the right to use birth control. All right, so let's file what I'm about to say under the TMI heading. Dr. McKenzie, why did you have to tell me that? All right, here's what I'm fixing to tell you that some of you're going to have to work to unhear it. I apologize. Hey, the McKenzies, we can't have any more kids. There's been a medical procedure done. All right? Hey, I'm sorry for saying that. You can like hit rewind, fast forward, and maybe you can like unhear it. Okay. And so the court ruled that the McKenzies, we had that right to use permanent birth control measures. Why? It's our business. Well, McKenzie, if it's your business, why did you have to go and freaking share it with us? I'm sorry. I was trying to make a point. I felt like it was a good way to make a point, kind of get your attention. All right. And so this right to privacy, constitutional right to privacy, is not explicitly stated in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. It's implied. So this is an activist ruling. It's implied by a bunch of amendments, not just, I'm going 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th. All right, 4th, no unlawful search and seizure. Why? Because what's in my house, the authorities can come in, because can't come in unless they have a warrant, because what I got in my house is my own private business. All right, 5th, you got the right to remain silent, because what you've done is your own business. You don't have to confess. Private business. All right, so I'm implied. All right, the 9th. Remember the 9th Amendment? Power to the people. Do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anybody else. You've got the right. I'm drinking a cup of coffee right now. Bill of Rights doesn't say I have the right to a cup of coffee. All right, but it's implied. All right, and then the 14th is what? States can't take away due process, can't take away the right to life, liberty, pro-choice, freedom, or property without due process of law. So you've got, and the 14th Amendment, the Selective Incorporation Doctrine of the 14th Amendment is what applies all these Bill of Rights gradually, selectively to the states. So you've got 4 different amendments at least that seem to imply this thing, the right to privacy. As long as the right to birth control, everybody's okay with it, right? I bet 33 members of my class agree with the Supreme Court's ruling in Griswold versus Connecticut. Furthermore, that you've got the right, I don't have the right to be, snatching your phone up in class and reading all your texts, reading all your stuff. That's your own private business, right? Unless the authorities have a warrant to blah, 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 blah. All right, so we all agree on a right to privacy in certain cases. Well, here, what about abortion? Here comes abortion. All right, so Roe v. Wade is 1973. It comes next after Griswold. All right, so Jane Roe wanted abortion in Texas. Abortion was against the law in Texas, and I'm going to say maybe 20 other states, probably Georgia included. More conservative, culturally conservative states. All right, I'm going to take a breath. You review. You agree we got the right to privacy concerning birth control, conserving your text, don't you? Don't you? I like the way I said don't you. Don't you? That was kind of fun. Don't you? Everybody say don't you. Shut up, Mackenzie. I'm trying to review, will you? Good gracious. Okay, here we go. Number 2. So, hey, you know the ruling that abortion is going to be illegal is going to be based on the right to privacy. States, the state of Texas can't outlaw it. A stare decisis the doctrine, precedent. Since Texas can't outlaw it, other states can't outlaw it either. All right. Okay, let's think about the right to privacy and abortion. Somebody might say, well, abortion's different. So notice what they're going to say. Abortion's different because you're killing somebody. And so it still comes down to the personhood of the fetus. Is the fetus a person with rights? Okay, so let's go with the hypothetical. 2 friends, somebody invites somebody over to their house. Once they come in, they kill them. All right, poor person that gets killed. They thought they were their friends, and it turns out they're not. They kill them. So here comes the police to the house of the murderer, and they say, hey, we're going to kill you for murder. And the murderer says, you can't do that. I killed the guy, but it was inside my house. What I do in my house is my own private business. If I want to cook them up and eat them, if I want to be a cannibal inside my own house, that's my own private business. You can't be telling me not to do that. Who do you think you are to judge? Okay. All right, but clearly because it was a person that they killed inside their house, they don't have the right to murder inside their house because the right to life of that person clearly outweighs the right to privacy to do what you want of your own house because rights bump up against each other. So your right to privacy and bumps up against somebody's right to life, which means, hey, abortion, for all the legal limbo, still comes down to whether or not the fetus is a person with rights, or whether or not a fetus becomes a person with rights once they're born. And so what Daddy said in his philosophy class was that a fetus is not a person with rights. It's a human being. It's got human chromosomes, yada, yada, yada. It's got human characteristics. It's alive. It's got all the characteristics of a human being, but it's not a person with rights. So there's a distinction between the terms human being and person with rights. A human being, a living being that's human, doesn't have rights until birth. All right, till the birthday, as one person put it. Whereas the pro-life person's going to say, no. A fetus is a person with rights, and you killed that fetus, you've killed a person, and that ain't good. All right? So you're still, in spite of the legal terminology that gets used, you're still stuck with this question, is the fetus as a person? I had a Aristotle philosopher in graduate school, and I wrote something in a paper about abortion. I can't remember what it was, and she said the abortion question comes down to whether a fetus is a person. If it is, it's not allowed. If it's not, it's allowed. End of story. That was her argument. She was a smarter person than I am. Okay. So let's move on. All right, Ronald Reagan got elected president. By this point, Republicans are starting to lean pro-life, become more and more pro-life, and a lot of these folks voted Reagan, and he's become a pro-life president. Even though as governor of California, he signed a real, it was the nation's strongest pro-choice law bill into law. So he signed, so Reagan's done a lot of flip-flopping over the years. So he's a pro-choice governor of California, and then he becomes a pro-life president. All right. So what's going on here? He, as president, he nominates pro-life conservative judges. Scalia, Kennedy, Sandra Day O'Connor, 3 of them. He had 3 nominations. He put 3. He was 3 for 3. Put 3 people. 3 for 4. He tried to put Bork on there, who was really conservative, and he lost. So he bats 75%, just like exactly average for our president. All right, so it gets these three pro-life judges on there. So, like the pro-life community, Christian Coalition, Moral Majority says, okay, hey, the Supreme Court's going to change its mind. All right, so here we go. We get Webster versus Reproductive Health Services. I'm going to say it's maybe 1983. So the court rules that, in this case, life begins at conception, not at birth, at conception. So, hey, they're reading that and they're thinking, hey, we won. All right, it seems to imply that a fetus is a person. It implies it, but it doesn't say it. All right, so what it does say is because so many taxpayers have such strong moral objections to abortions, you can't have abortions in taxpayer-funded public hospitals. That's illegal. So if a lady wants an abortion, she has to go to a private abortion clinic. All right, so it makes it a little harder, makes it more expensive to have an abortion. Doesn't make it illegal to have an abortion. Case number 2, Planned Parenthood versus abortion. It goes the complete opposite direction that the pro-life folks were hoping the court was going to go. It upholds Roe versus Wade. Says that there is a constitutional right to privacy concerning this issue. It just said that teenagers can't make this decision on their own. So teenage girls got to get their parents' consent, or if they're not living at home, they got to get a judge's consent before they can have an abortion. In other words, it makes it harder to have an abortion. All right. Okay. So it created, like my little political cartoon says, the Reagan era courts created hoops to jump through to make it harder to get an abortion. Really didn't cut down on the number of abortions. 1 million abortions a year starting in 1973, going kind of through the 80s, maybe the mid 80s, late 80s. These hoops didn't really cut down on the number of abortions. All right. Now, having said that, hey, the number of abortions since the 80s, I'm going maybe early 90s, has been steadily declining. You get some blips as the economy goes bad. Abortion rate goes up as the economy goes bad. It goes down during good economies. It went steadily down during the Obama years, even though he was strongly pro-choice. All right, I've got a real good article. I'm going to make it optional reading. It's written by a pro-life Christian. It's a phenomenal article. And it talks about other things that I just think are really, really important. And he sent a couple of things out. So, I just love the articles. He's not really making a pro-life argument. He's talking about other things in it. But the article's going to say something a little offensive to like pro-choice people. They're going to say something a little offensive to pro-Trump people. He's like a never-Trump pro-life activist. And he's also got a song from Hamilton on there about forgiveness, and he's got a song that's like a praise music song about like faith during the age of coronavirus. All right, so all kinds of stuff. A phenomenal writer, but I'm making it optional because he is from a very Christian point of view. But he's got a graph in there showing that regardless of who the president is, since the 90s, it's just kind of a steady decline to I think maybe 700,000 abortions a year. All right, so things to be said about that as well. Okay, there's that. Okay, all right, there's the elephant fetus. I even looked up turns out elephants take nearly 2 years to develop in an elephant womb. So, I've learned about embryonic development in elephants coming out of this thing. Remember my argument here, a picture worth 1,000 words. You know it when you see it is the argument. Okay. Boom, we have busted out of the abortion debate. And we're going back to free expression and the First Amendment. But file away my elephant picture. All right. So remember what we said about limits on free speech. Shank, clear and present danger. Brandon versus Ohio, imminent lawless action basically mean something awfully similar. You can't say anything, can't express yourself in a way that's going to hurt somebody clearly. Hey, pastors that tell their congregants that they should come to church, and then congregants get coronavirus. All right, I mean, there's a legal question coming up there. All right, so free expression and harm that free expression does. Well, we're adding to this obscenity. Dr. McKenzie, can't mean I can't say the F word. I can't say damn. It's illegal to cuss. No, it's not. But some forms of obscenity have been ruled. It's been ruled that states and local communities can outlaw things as obscene. All right, so here's our example. In the 80s, there was an artist named Robert Mapplethorpe. And he does this art exhibition that was like exhibited in New York somewhere. He's real provocative in his art. And one of the things that one of his art exhibits was called the Piss Christ, where he took a crucifix and he dropped it into a jar of urine, and he took a picture of it, and he considered that to be an artistic expression about his objections of religious intolerance or something like that. His supporters found it artistically insightful. Christians found it obscene. I'm not really a fan of the Piss Christ picture. Okay, so then the question was, can a local community, New York probably wouldn't do it, but can a local community pass a law declaring what some might call artistic expression to be obscene? Okay, and the answer is yes. Yes. In this case, Roth versus U.S., and when you're memorizing it, hey, it's not on your 15 cases, but I think it's interesting. Maybe cultural conservatives would call obscenity an evidence of moral rot. So you can use that word rot and raw to memorize it. Okay, so here's what a judge says in the majority opinion. Somebody's going to say what to you is obscene is me art. How are you going to objectively define obscenity? He says, you know what something obscene is? I know it when I see it. A picture's worth 1,000 words. All right? Okay. So that's his argument. In his majority opinion in the Supreme Court, he says, I know obscenity when I see it. All right? Show me a picture, I'll tell you whether or not it's obscene. All right. Now, they go farther than that. They say something that's obscene has to have no redeeming value. They use the word prurient, which means they're just trying to be provocative. They're just trying to put something, say, as nasty as they can. And they just want to say, hey, who are you to tell me I can't say this? There's no redeeming value. And it can also be defined by community standards. A local community can define something to be obscene, whereas maybe another community doesn't define it as obscene. All right, so let me put it this way. What is seen as obscene in Calhoun, Georgia, probably not seen as obscene in maybe Vegas, right? All right, the McKenzie family took a trip to Vegas like 10 years ago when all the kids were in middle school. They were all four like in 7th grade at the same time. All right, somehow or another we pulled that off, and all our kids were in 7th grade at the same time before they went back to being a little bit older than each other. All right, and the McKenzie boys just loved it because these guys would come up to you and they'd hit this thing in their hands, and you couldn't help but look down. It was a picture of a naked lady. All right, and I was like, what are you doing? Quit. And, they'd keep on doing it, and like my guys, the McKenzie boys would look down and giggle. All right, so what's obscene in Calhoun is not obscene and there, there's a lot of stronger things than those pictures of naked ladies in Vegas. So what's obscene in Calhoun is not obscene in Vegas. What's okay in Vegas is not okay in Calhoun. All right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. You know, you've heard that expression. All right, so Vegas and Calhoun would define obscenity differently, and the court says, well, local communities, so it's like a federalism thing, local communities can do that. Which means not all expression is free expression beyond just whether or not something you say is going to get somebody physically hurt. All right, Gitler versus New York, that's incorporating free speech based on the selective incorporation of the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. All right, and we're going to say that. I'm going to say that several times. All right, but free speech got incorporated to the states in 1925. So I can't remember like the specifics of this case, but it's incorporating free speech, meaning states can regulate free speech in certain ways. All right, and then fighting words. It's a New Hampshire case. Two guys got in a bar fight. I don't know the specifics of it. Guy got in trouble because what he said got somebody hurt. Maybe, you know, they're about to get in a fight and he said your mama, and a fight broke out and like people got hurt. So fighting words are a limit on free speech. Now, it's never been used. It's kind of like the War Powers Act from last semester. Remember, that was a limit on the president's war-making abilities, and then Congress has never used it. In this case, the Supreme Court said somebody says something that's clearly going to start a fight, it's going to get somebody hurt, they can get in trouble for it, but it's never happened since this case. So, I mean, it's a hypothetical limit on free speech that's never really been used by the court. But, given all that, there are 4 specific limitations on free speech. Clear and present danger. That's Schenck. Imminent lawless action, Brandenburg. Obscenity, Roth. And then fighting words, Chaplinsky. All right. Okay. Back to the Establishment Clause. Okay. When you look at separation of church and state, if somebody's liberal, really liberal, they're called like a strict separationist, I think is the term. And somebody's more conservative, called an accommodationist, they're kind of more okay with like more entanglements of church and state. Remember that lemon test? All right, so you got this, I think it's 2004, it's a more conservative court. And so it's Zillman versus Simmons-Harris. So here's the facts of the case. This lady, Simmons-Harris, wanted to send her daughter to a Catholic school with a Cleveland voucher. She felt like public schools in Cleveland were violent. So it wasn't for religious reasons, it was for safety of my daughter reasons. But what she wanted was taxpayer money going to pay for her daughter's education at a Catholic school. And the Supreme Court said, okay. Because, you know, it's done for a secular purpose. So the more accommodationist court kind of leans on that first prong of the lemon test, but allows for some entanglements and so for some religious encouragement. Okay, so hey, the girl got to go. Taxpayer money was used to send her to Catholic school. Okay, so we've seen this case again. I'm just mentioning it again. Santa Fe School District versus Doe. I always make a point of teaching this in the spring, not in the fall when we're going to football games, and somebody might say, wait a minute, I thought you couldn't do that. All right, and hey, a few recordings ago, we said sometimes people just don't pay any attention to what the Supreme Court said. But in 2000, the Supreme Court said you couldn't have student-led prayers at football games, you couldn't have coach-led prayers at football games, and it just gets ignored. But here we got, about 4 years apart, here we got a strict separationist decision by the Supreme Court. All right, so I mean, the court's just kind of inconsistent on things. Hypothetically, if you were to ask me what I would think to myself if I saw someone doing something that the Supreme Court said was illegal at a football game or at a graduation, I'd say, well, hypothetically, I'm not saying I've ever seen this happen, but hypothetically, I might say, well, have at it. It's okay with me if you do this. If you break the law out of your religious convictions, that's just fine with me. Have at it. just as long as you don't condemn my students who break the law, who broke the law inadvertently when their parents brought them illegally to the United States. And maybe you shouldn't even condemn their parents, because why did the parents break the law? Out of their sacred obligation to care for their children. If one of my kids got coronavirus because I hadn't washed my hands enough time, I would see that as a failure of a sacred obligation on my part, right? All right, so in this case, you have two cases of people who are breaking the law out of a sense of sacred obligation. Hey, more power to them. That's what I would say. Hypothetically, I might also say that students have come up to me and say, hey, can you make a recording? Can you make a video? Because these videos really help us study for tests. And I always think to myself, yeah, I can make a video, even though I'm not very good at making videos. I screw up the sound again and again. And then I think of the undocumented student who was also a straight A student who made a 4 on the AP U.S. history test, a 5 on the AP government test, who once upon a time came up to me and said, you know, you could make recordings of these lectures. I'll show you how to do it. And then you could send it out to everybody. And he had to show me like 863 times because I kept screwing it up and not following the directions right. And he patiently showed me how to do it again and again and again. Now he's in New York somewhere, I understand, and he's making a whole lot more money than I am. And my attitude towards him is gratitude for helping me learn how to do this, and love. Because, hey, a teacher's supposed to love his kids, right? That's what the answer might be. That's the answer to that hypothetical question. I'm not sure any of this stuff ever happened. I'm not saying any of this ever happened, but hypothetically, if it did and someone were to ask me about it, that might be what I said about it. Maybe. Speaking hypothetically, of course. Okay, here we go. Okay, the last two. Okay, New York Times versus Sullivan. Okay, this one's complicated. Remember when we were doing libel, slander and libel? So libel is when you write something bad about somebody else and then they try to sue you, and we said it's hard to sue like the National Enquirer. All right, so here's this case. It's a 60s case. Sullivan was an Alabama sheriff, and he doesn't like civil rights protesters. It always comes back to civil rights, Mackenzie. Yes, sometimes it does. All right, so he publishes names of protesters in the paper so that people like intimidate them and maybe hurt them, and then they'll be scared to protest. So then the New York Times didn't like what he's doing, so they wrote a critical article about him. So then he says, hey, this is fake news. This part of this article isn't true. I'm suing you for libel. And the New York Times said, well, we thought it was true. Our bad. Yeah, we got some of the details wrong, but we weren't lying. We thought what it was true. The source has been good before, and in fact, 85% of the article is actually true. And so the Supreme Court said, you've got to be able to prove that the person's lying. And Sullivan can prove it, which makes it awfully hard. And so the legal doctrine is actual malice. It's got to be a public figure. It's got what gets said, printed, said, slander. It's got to hurt their reputation really, really bad. And the person publishing it has got to know they're lying. That's why it's hard to sue over actual malice. All right, Lawrence versus Texas. All right, so what have we said? I compared it to something else. States can't outlaw homosexuality or lesbianism, not gay marriage, homosexuality or lesbianism. So Texas had a law on the books that it had never quite gotten rid of. So we're comparing it to like Griswold and birth control. Except, hey, there's probably a lot of people in Texas still wanted this to be illegal. But somebody sued in 2003, and so the Supreme Court in 2003 said states are not allowed to outlaw private, so based on the right of privacy, consensual sexual behavior. All right. So hey, I mean, that was the beginning of like big time movement on that issue, and then you've got big time movement on gay marriage as well. When Barack Obama ran for president, he was against gay marriage. He was in favor of something called civil unions that would extend like legal benefits to gay couples, but without given the name marriage to the gay couples. And then he was convinced by his kids. Sasha and Malia were in favor of gay marriage, and then while he was president, they convinced him. So, I mean, goodness gracious, a lot of movement on this issue, and personally, I've kind of moved on this one in the direction of that movement, even though on abortion over time, I've kind of moved in a different direction. So I've moved kind of in the opposite direction on these two kind of hot-button cultural issues. I can't tell you exactly when I moved. I can in one case, but I've said enough. All right. Okay. There you go. I'm going to pause. Okay, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. We're going one more. Oh, how I hope that this sucker is going to record. All right. You're going to get 4 by the Fifth Amendment. Look at that. I'm going to say 5, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be 4. All right, so no self-incrimination. We memorized that year, right? So we moved out of the First Amendment. The Miranda court case is based on the no self-incrimination part. So the first 2 bullets are the same right. So Ernesto Miranda confessed to kidnapping and raping a lady. All right, he said he thought he had to. He didn't realize he didn't have to confess. His lawyer said, well, his Fifth Amendment rights are being violated by the state of Arizona. The Supreme Court agreed with him. He got released from jail. Ever since then, when police all over the country, stare decisis precedent, arrest somebody, they not only say, hey, you've got the right to remain silent. Well, they say you've got the right to remain silent. My fault. All right. Okay, well, we'll talk about attorneys in the next slide. All right. Now, hey, here's the ironic, strange twist to this story. I think I may have told you. Can anybody tell me? Anybody remember? Give yourself a Jolly Rancher or some very clean piece of candy that can't give you any kind of virus. But at any rate, they let him out of jail. So then he went to a bar. So it's not going to be Chaplinsky. He got in a fight. All right. The guy killed him in the fight, and the guy got arrested. And the guy who killed him in the fight was one of the first people in U.S. history to be read his Miranda rights because he killed Miranda shortly after the Miranda case was ruled on by the Supreme Court. So a little irony there. Okay, no double jeopardy. All right, this is a fun story. OJ Part 1. So how do I do this? OJ, so let's get to the heart of the matter. He got found not guilty of killing his wife. I think you know that. There's a great ESPN documentary. There's a great Netflix miniseries on it, starring Cuba Gooding, starring the African-American guy who's on This Is Us. And so, I mean, that OJ story is a phenomenally fascinating story. He was a phenomenally popular sports star, right up there, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. And then his wife got murdered, and he's a suspect. And you have a low-speed interstate chase where everybody's watching on TV. OJ's on the phone with the police. He's got a gun to his head, so they don't pull him over because they're afraid he's going to commit suicide right there. And then in the trial, he finally gets arrested in the trial. The most famous part of the trial is when the prosecuting attorney gets baited, the African-American prosecuting attorney played by the guy from This Is Us, gets baited by civil rights attorney Johnny Cochran, who calls him an Uncle Tom, and he says, you're scared to let him try on the murder weapon, which is basically these gloves, right? And hey, we've got gloves. I've been wearing gloves with coronavirus a whole lot. All right. And so the guy eventually goes, well, nuh-uh, I ain't scared. And he gets him try on the gloves, and the gloves don't fit. Now, I've read that, first off, hey, OJ was a Hollywood actor by this point, so he knew to spread out his hands and make like the gloves don't fit and say, hey, they're too tight. All right. Explanation number 2, he had arthritis. He was taking the arthritis medication, which swelled up his hands. All right. But at any rate, the closing argument for the defense, if the gloves won't fit, you must acquit. The jury acquitted him. At that point, it became impossible to put him on trial for murder. That'd be double jeopardy. So then you had a civil trial. The family sued him. It's easier to convict in a civil suit than a criminal case. He owed him a lot of money, so then he sold a lot of stuff that he had sold. And the sentencing guidelines for stealing your old trophies is a year to 25 years. And the judge gave him like 25 years in order to get around double jeopardy, most people think. This was in the year 2000, and he just got let out on parole. All right. There's also a real good movie called Double Jeopardy where Ashley Judd gets framed for killing her husband. It turns out her husband's not dead, so then she plots to murder him because she's thinking, hey, I've already been convicted of killing him. Now I can kill him without getting in trouble. All right, the last thing is no trial in a federal case without a grand jury. The fourth of the rights, a grand jury is a big 30-person jury deciding if there's enough evidence to indict in order to put the person on trial. So no trial in a federal case without a grand jury. Okay, Sixth Amendment. So last year we learned speedy trial. Okay, that's one thing in Sixth Amendment. All right. Also, it goes SCC, right to counsel, speedy trial, counsel, confront witnesses. All right, this comes out of the Gideon case. Clarence Earl Gideon got convicted of robbing a jukebox, stealing $72 worth of coins from a jukebox in a bar. And it's like a 60s case, and $72 won't buy you a lawyer. So he had a right to a lawyer if he could afford one. He couldn't. So he tried to defend himself. He did a lousy job and got thrown in prison. In prison, he starts studying the Constitution. And he decides that the right to counsel implies if you can't afford one, one will be appointed. So back to our Miranda rights. That's what they say on TV. Have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, one can be appointed for you, will be appointed for you since the Gideon case. And by the way, his conviction got overturned. There was a retrial. Turned out the chief witness against him was the guy who had turned over the jukebox. All right, so he got set free. Pretty good movie, starring Henry Fonda, who also, as a younger man, starred as Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath. All right, also the right to confront witnesses. If you got HBO, the greatest show, if you don't mind a lot of cussing and like violence, The Wire. It's political, about the drug trade in Baltimore. I think I've mentioned it when I talk about the bureaucracy, but it's amazing, but you have to not mind cussing and violence. But in that show, multiple times, people they won't testify against a drug kingpin because they know he's going to look right at them in the courtroom, and then he's got connections outside of prison, he can have them killed. And that's based on the right to confront witnesses. When somebody witnesses against you in court, you can be sitting there looking at them, and that makes it tough on witnesses against a mafia guy or violent criminal. Okay, Eighth Amendment. No cruel and unusual punishment. That was what we said last time. Also, no excessive bail. So you do something not all that bad, the police can't charge you, the court can't charge you $1 gajillion for your bail. Excessive fine. I've been pulled over for not having a seatbelt on. The fine was $15. If it was $15 billion, that'd be excessive and unconstitutional under the Eighth Amendment. All right. I think this one came up, waterboarding, this is called. It came up during the Bush War in Iraq years got addressed by Scalia in that video. He said, hey, 8th Amendment doesn't apply. Waterboarding, it's not punishment, it's interrogation. If we take an original's reading of the 8th Amendment applies to punishment. It doesn't apply to interrogation. So that's the original's reading. And then like the activists would say, come on now, of course this applies. You know, good gracious. It implies that you can't torture people. It applies because it implies that you can't torture people. And so there's another place where you kind of see originalism and activism, and maybe implies certain things maybe differently from Yoder the Amish case. Okay, last one, isn't it? I hope. Yep. All right, BED. All right, born in the USA. Anybody born in the USA is a citizen. A lot of immigration implications here. This young lady was born to undocumented parents. They got deported. She stayed in the United States. This comes out of, based on the 14th Amendment. She was born in the United States. Boom, she's a citizen. All right, comes out of the Dred Scott case. Remember, Dred Scott sued for his freedom. Supreme Court ruled what? He's not a citizen, so he can't sue. So the 14th Amendment says anybody who's not a citizen is automatically a citizen. They can sue. What did the court say in the majority opinion? Hey, he's not quite as much of a person as white people are. He doesn't have the same rights as a white person. An African American is not a person in the same sense that a white person is somehow less of a person. Okay, now you know you don't. Now my liberal friends, you know you don't like that ruling here, but hey, it's the same ruling in kind of Roe versus Wade. All right, so you know the conservatives back then bought it. You know that somebody's not less of a person, that the Supreme Court can't designate somebody not to be a person, to be less of a person. But, hey, the hardcore conservatives back then, you know. All right, so tough legal stuff going on there. All right, civil rights. No person shall be denied equal protection of the laws. Everything in the civil rights movement is based on the Equal Protection Clause. This is called the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. All right, and then finally, this selective incorporation thing, due process gets applied to the states gradually, selectively. The Due Process Clause, the 14th Amendment. No states can deny life, liberty, property without due process of laws. All right. Hey, there's the thing. Oh my gosh, I am hoping, I am praying, I'm thinking maybe I can get it right. Oh, not to be such an idiot. Hey, pause it, review it. Hey, this is for SCC, speedy trial, right to counsel, confront witnesses, no cruel and unusual punishment. No excessive bail, no excessive fines, BED. Born in the USA, equal protection of the laws, due process. All right, here we go. Let's hit it for the third time. Hopefully, third time's a charm. I bet it goes more than 54 minutes this time. What do y'all think?